mean that I have some very specific people I just want to thank for making tonight happen, because I have really good ideas and terrible implementation skills. And so it always relies on other people to do good work. And first and foremost, definitely the Lake Champlain Basin Program. Katie Dar, who is our staff support at the Basin Program, is the one who is able to just coordinate all of this. And find the place and get the invitations out there, and then get the pizza and all of the stuff that needs to happen to make this event happen. And the Basin Program in general, for all of the support that they provide, all of the CACs. We are one of 3 CACs. There's a CAC for Quebec, and there's a CAC for New York, and Vermont, and Katie is the coordinator for all 3 of those. L2. Quebec is a little different. So for both New York and Vermont, that's the other thing I just wanted to share as well. We do coordinate with the New York and Quebec CACs on a pretty regular basis. We all serve on the steering committee for the Basin Program and the executive committee. So we have regular contact with the chairs of the different CACs. But we also work together on like joint things that might be impacting all 3 regions. The other group that I'd like to thank is the Lake Champlain Committee for co-sponsoring and promoting this event with us. It wouldn't be possible to have this event without people who are able to come to it. And so we really appreciate that. And then also the town of Shelburne for letting us host this event here tonight. So we've talked a little bit. I think we can go to the next. Oh, I think first I need to ask if there's any public comment online. Does anybody have any public comment? Because this is one of our CAC meetings. This is the most public we've had in a while.
You can make a comment after you hear the action plan.
Yes, you can make a comment after you hear the action plan as well, if that makes sense. So we've done our poll. This is a slide about who we are as a CAC. And I think I've touched on all 4 of those points. So we're going to move on. I'm going to look at this while I do this. So we've all introduced ourselves. And I think everybody is here except for 2 people. So great. Okay. Yeah.
38-year member of the CAC. And this is fantastic. I actually came to this meeting because I heard about it the other day, and I wanted to come see how things have evolved. And thanks to your leadership, Eric sticking with it, and of course, Lake Champlain Committee, always supportive of the citizen side of things. It's great to see you all here tonight, and really, really inspiring that I can show up at one of these meetings now and still see it.
I know. Yeah, the CAC has been around for a very long time, and we are one of the, I think, founding members of the groups of people that have really brought citizen voice to the legislature in terms of like what our concerns are, what we love about Lake Champlain, and where we want to see action happen from our policy members. You want to move? Thank you for saying that. I appreciate you being here.
Graduated.
I didn't know you. Yeah.
My heart still.
I didn't know you did the CAC for so long. All right. So next, am I controlling this?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm now in control. Okay. This slide is really just to share some of the things that Lake Champlain provides. If you were going to do a return on investment, whether it's economic, culture, history, I think you touched upon that, Hillary, recreation, quality, medicinal, the health. I don't know if anybody else is a cold water dipper in the room, but that has been my new woo. Yes. Yeah, it's amazing. And every time I go, I'm like, God, I love Vermonters because we are crazy and it's really fun. And and Lake Champlain's the best place to do it. The spiritual health, huh? Trees, yes, the lake stays open. The value, the natural heritage, the peace that it gives. That was my one word, was peaceful. Every time I go to the lake, I live in St. Albans and go to Kilcare on a pretty regular basis. And every time I go, I'm like, I just feel like I can breathe down there. And then the family, the people that are connected around this lake on all sides of it. I think about you know, my why a lot, and similar to Allison, I grew up in this basin, on both Quebec and Vermont side. Never had the opportunity to live in New York yet, but that really is my why as well. It's really where my family is from, where my home is, and where I see myself living, my life. What we've done this year with a lot of help from many people, and we sort of wanted to think a little bit more creatively. We've been doing a 2-page report. At one point, how many pages were the action plans? They were really long, like 40 to 50 pages. Then we got really efficient in our messaging to the legislature. And we're like, let's just do a 2-pager. And this year we were like, what's our limitation? Why are we limiting ourselves to this? And so we really thought, let's get a little more creative. I want to say it's really great to have Andrew and Breck on the committee. They're new members this year, and they helped us create this Venn diagram, which I just really love. And I think Allison was part of it. We did workshop this in a lot of our meetings, which was really fun, and you know, thinking about the words that we wanted on there. But really, when we think about the future of Lake Champlain, we think about water quality, we think about climate resilience, and we think about the healthy ecosystems that are needed to bring all of those things together, which includes diverse habitat, flood management, water management, and that's really how we're going to get that healthy future for Lake Champlain. So we're really proud of this diagram. It took a year, I want to say, from like when Breck talked about it at our retreat. 6 months. It was at our retreat that we talked about it. He's like, I have this idea in my brain. So anyway, so we're really excited that we've come up with this. We think it really explains like what we think about when we're thinking about Lake Champlain, and what we're thinking about when we're thinking about the future of the health of the lake. Next slide. All right, so I want to just direct your attention to the second page, where we've outlined our 2025 priorities in the blue box. What you need to know about this is that these are what we are asking for, and then we go into more detail in the rest of the things, which we'll also cover tonight, so we can explain everything. But really, our main thing is we have to advance flood mitigation, climate adaptation, and resilience through all of the riparian wetlands, floodplain conservation and restoration, dam removal, right-sizing our culverts, and agricultural and land use practices that reduce runoff. The second thing that we must do is prioritize land use and sustainable development that reduces water quality impacts. We must pursue continued and robust investments in aquatic invasive species education, monitoring, and management continually without pause. We need to develop and implement plans to assess, mitigate, and eliminate chloride contamination, and continue efforts to address PFAS and other contaminants. And we need to continue to increase and improve equitable public access to all of Lake Champlain and its tributaries for all communities. If we don't love a place, we will not take care of it. I'm going to turn it over to Karina for the next few slides. She's going to talk more about the flood mitigation and adaptation to resilience.
Yeah. So one priority in our action plan is riparian and floodplain restoration under the umbrella of advancing flood mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. And this is thinking about the connectivity of our freshwater systems from the headwaters all the way to Lake Champlain. And not just the water itself, but the river corridor and floodplains and wetlands that are connected to that system, and the vegetation along those boundaries, the riparian buffers, and the health of the soils and the hydrologic connectivity of that system. So the CAC endorses investment in nature-based solutions for resilience. It endorses full staffing, cohesion, and collaboration within and across the DEC, and increased collaboration and support with organizations working to implement this work. Since 2011, I learned that Lake Champlain Basin has been impacted by 22 major FEMA extreme weather disasters in Vermont, and that includes 3 flood damaging storms in 2023 and 2 in 2024. The work of S-213 or Act 121, the Flood Safety Act that passed last year, was an important step forward, but we definitely have more work to do to work to restore and reconnect our freshwater systems. Next slide, or I can move the slide.
No, I got it.
Okay, perfect. And this one's is about resilience, and again, that importance of connectivity for resilience. And this shows not just infrastructure, our roads can act as dams, the culverts along our roads can act as dams, they can block aquatic organism passage, they can increase erosion and nutrient loading into Lake Champlain. And dams do the same thing on even a larger scale. So it's working to reconnect those freshwater systems, to right size our culverts and remove our dams for all of those good benefits of flood resilience, clean water, aquatic organism passage. And this picture shows a perch culvert and then improved culvert with a natural stream bottom crossing so that fish and aquatic organisms can move up and down that system.
Oh,
I
sorry.
was wondering. where
Yeah,
that- okay.
I needed more room, I thought.
That's okay.
Is
Is it one back?
Yeah.
Oh, there.
There,
And this,
okay.
I asked Katie to add a few, I was wondering where they were. A few pictures of the dam removal that Lake Champlain Basin Program helped support this summer in Salisbury on a tributary to Otter Creek. And this shows the dam that's blocking aquatic organism passage and the large piece of yellow equipment, the excavator, removing that dam, and then the reconnected river, the free-flowing river. This dam had been in place for over 230 years. So there was a lot of sediment that had accumulated behind it, and we restored that system and reconnected the river. So pretty exciting project. Thank you, Katie. Next, there you go. Agriculture and working lands. Since 2016, we have had increased investment in technical assistance programs and on-farm pollution prevention, and have cost effectively reduced phosphorus runoff to our water. However, the impacts of climate change and the intensifying storm events that have been moving through means that we have more work than ever to do, and the programs are oversubscribed, and we need to work harder to protect the health of our lake and support these programs. So the CAC recommends additional state and federal funding to support agricultural producers to continue to work hard to provide vibrant local food systems and reach climate water quality goals on working lands. And lastly, this one is about our infrastructure. We have a lot of infrastructure that was built at one time and needs to be updated. Both because just time takes a toll on infrastructure, but also because of the storm events that are happening now. So we need to right size that infrastructure to handle the storms that we are experiencing. That includes our public wastewater facilities, septic systems, and the CAC supports improving that public infrastructure, including our bridges, roadways, drinking water facilities, limiting new construction where it doesn't make sense in our river corridors and floodplains, those areas that are going to continue to flood, improving failed municipal systems, inventorying existing septic systems located near water bodies, and continuation of the Healthy Homes Initiative through DEC that provides funding to support failing septic systems, and more proactive education, oversight, and outreach to homeowners about their septic systems. Pass it back to you.
Yeah, so it's going to come back to me. So the next slide and the next piece on the back side of the action plan talks a little bit more about some other things that need to move forward, for Lake Champlain's health in the future. And really the big one is this contamination, pollution, specifically chlorides, which I think 75% of chlorides in our watershed are coming off private lands. And our ask right now is that we have to eliminate toxic contamination. It's essential to protecting human and environmental health. We're recommending that the state incentivize public and private applicators to follow safe de-icing and winter road management best practices to reduce fluoride pollution and cumulative costs, particularly as winter rain events increase. There's a program in New York that we've actually received a presentation on. We're looking at what that could look like in Vermont. We need to invest in aquatic invasive species spread and prevention. AIS impacts aquatic ecosystems integrity and have the potential to cause billions of dollars in damage to recreation, water quality, infrastructure, and property values. Again, our neighbors, both to our north and across the lake, have pretty robust programs that we're looking at and investigating. But we have to increase investment in consistent staffing. And this has been an issue over the years where they fund for a while, then they take the money away and then they fund again. And that creates a gap in staffing and knowledge, and continuation. And then we also need to consider a new funding source involving a mandatory boat decal for motorized and non-motorized craft and a mandatory watercraft inspection and certification program. And one of the things that we're looking at that New York is doing is a high profile inspection stations at key lake access points. The next one is to prioritize land use and development that reduces water quality impacts. So this is an important piece of what needs to happen. We're encouraging the state to increase flexibility of project types that are eligible for clean water funds, to effectively improve water quality. We also need to bring existing developments to current water quality standards. We need to pair new development with effective mitigation efforts to address the increase of impervious surfaces and added stormwater runoff as we're talking about the need for housing and larger developments. Even in our developed areas, this needs to happen. And we need to provide consistent regulatory enforcement and support resources and technical assistance for developers, farmers, and woodland owners to ensure sound management, healthy soils, and clean water. And then finally, the expand equitable public access and recreation to Lake Champlain. This is something we've been advocating for probably since Buzz was on the CAC. But this is one of the things that I'm most passionate about. Again, I believe that people will not take care of a place if they don't love and know the place. And so in that, we need that it's not just about looking at Lake Champlain and seeing that beautiful sunset. It's about being on the lake and being able to access the lake from a public standpoint, not from our camps or other places, but all Vermonters need to allocate resources to expand water access for all, including opportunities for non-motorized recreation. And we need to improve specifically in the South Lake for marginalized and historically disenfranchised communities. We need to continue investment in outdoor recreation businesses to bolster public access and Vermont's $1.5 billion recreation economy. Questions?
Yeah, I mean, it's my understanding when you talk about public access, that there are over 100 fishing access areas. Like 108. So are you talking about working with Fish and Wildlife to expand the number of fishing access areas that people can get to for free?
Definitely that.
Let's repeat the question for the folks online.
Okay. So the question is about recreation, whether or not we're asking or if we're looking to provide more access through fishing access, because we have over 100 in the state. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Cree? Okay, thank you. And what we're actually asking the legislators for. So I think it to me, it goes beyond just fishing access, right? It goes to parks, it goes to areas along rivers, it goes to places within the basin that people can access, that they're not walking on private land to access our waterways. Also, the fishing accesses are great, and there's conflict with non-motorized
Yeah.
boats.
You know, I think about sheltering. Separate. You know, a place where the motorized versus non-motorized. The thing that I think is special is they're free, and our parks are not.
So the comment, sorry, just so folks online can
Oh,
hear.
sorry.
The comment was just about the difference between the fishing access sites and parks is the fishing access sites are free and the parks are not. So that's an important distinction. There are a couple of questions.
Can I just add to
online.
that?
Yeah.
too?
Yeah.
I think also what's come up in the past that we would love to help support is access in the southern portion of the lake. Because there isn't a improved public access area in the south part of the lake. So that's something that continues to be brought to our attention.
Yeah, and also getting to Cree's point, one of the things with the fishing access areas is many of them are funded through federal funds that prioritizes motorized use over lower impact uses. And so that also sometimes triggers a conflict. And so that's another thing, and looking at this more broadly, we want to try and address, and it actually asks the state agency for more input to look at what are the gaps, what are the types of use of our public access areas, what is the recreational opportunity there, what are the restrictions, and how can we best serve that need.
I would
Sir.
like to comment on that idea that it's free, because there may be some free locations, but you can't do this kind of thing if it's all just gonna be free. And when people come out to enjoy the lake, they also need to respect the areas that offer access. And if there's a fee that can help improve that place, or, you know, the story of Charlotte, I'm really familiar with. But I also work with the state
typing that
parks,
in?
and that, they need the revenue. You just need the revenue. So if you're supporting that, you pay. It's like $5. Better than a sandwich.
Go ahead.
And on that, and then my other comment is also bringing this level of education to town managers, to municipalities. I think it's critical. I manage Charlotte Beach and ISS Water, and Charlotte Beach and Whiskey Bay. So I think what you're saying with that kind of element of bringing in that income. But I think town managers a lot more, need to be more invested personally in their bodies of water that are in their towns. And not just a pull in, pull out kind of thing. I think that's critical to get them on board and their select board. The second thing I wanted to say very quickly was, this was actually my second grade classroom back in the day.
It's under
And,
those old school.
as the county manager now, and Peggy and those at Shelburne, not suggesting this, but growing up in Shelburne, there was a beach bus. A lot of us were latchkey kids in the summers, and the beach bus would go around to all the neighborhoods and pick up all the kids, and if they ever did that to me now, I would freak. Because we would get dropped off down at the beach, spend the day at the beach, they had lifeguards, swimming lessons. And then they would drive us back home. And I thought that was something that really taps into that low income demographic or different family structures and working styles. Because we aren't getting enough. I hate to think of the lake as becoming a lake.
Yeah.
And it's in some towns more so than others, but. And then when you have the issues with water quality and closures. And you have these high temperatures and so forth and so on, I think that needs to be part of the planning for the next generation. And inviting them, finding ways to get them to the water. That isn't an additional financial or parental burden.
Great point. Are there questions online,
There
Katie?
are several questions online. So one question for Karina, do you have a map that would help visualize the Wainwright Dam removal that we could share?
I do. If you go to the Free Vermont Rivers website, there's something called the Dam Mapper, and you can actually see all the dam removals in the state. And it will zoom in on active projects and show you drone footage and tell a little story about each project. And I'm pretty sure that data has been updated for Wainwright, which is that recent dam removal. If not, you can see my email in that website and I can provide more information.
Great. There's a question about the 3-acre plus rule being implemented regarding stormwater runoff. I'm not sure if this committee has an answer about that. Perhaps Sarah might online.
What is the
What's
question?
the question?
What's the
Yes,
exact
is
question?
the 3-acre plus rule being implemented regarding stormwater runoff?
I think it is.
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, great. Yes.
Yes.
Lexi had a question. Can you add some more detail about the recommendations around reducing chlorides on private land? How would lawmakers incentivize applicators to follow best practices? Lori?
Lori.
I'm actually, I work for the Lake Champlain Committee, when I'm not at the CAC meetings, and we did advance a bill last year, very much modeled on an initiative in New York, and are trying to advance it again this year. So I've been meeting with legislators on that, but, I'm gonna, if Jared is online, our water protection advocate, I queued him up. I told him we would probably get him to get a question. And so I can walk through it, but I would love
There's
to
Jared.
turn it over to Jared because he's going to be leading that work in the legislature. So Jared Carpenter is the Lake Champlain Community Water Protection advocate.
Evening,
Yeah.
everybody. How are
Hi,
you?
Jared. Hi.
Good to see you all. I'm down here in Montpelier. So yes, so Lake Champlain Committee has been working on a measure for over a year now, meeting with folks with Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation and the Agency of Transportation to sort of work out some of the details. It is modeled, I have to look over at my notes. It is modeled on New York's, it's called the Randy Preston Road Salt Reduction Act, which is named after the former co-chair of the Adirondack Road Salt Working Group. That's sort of part of the core of it. And it also includes measures from New Hampshire's Green Snow Pro program, which is a liability program where if you follow these best management practices, you get some liability protection from slip and fall. But the state of Vermont, the AOT has a great best management practices on the use of salt application at various temperatures, and the use of brine and other techniques to reduce the amount of salt. Salt's very expensive. So there's ways out there where you can use the minimal amount available and still achieve that safety that you need with it, but not to do as much harm to aquatic resources or to infrastructure or the bottom of your car for that matter. But the measure would take those best management practices and apply them to education and outreach programs for commercial and municipal applicators, as well as education programs for small businesses and residents. And that's part of the core of it. But then there's also portions of the bill focus on monitoring water quality levels for chronic and acute levels of chloride, storage and disposal. So making sure that salt sheds are covered and that practices are used if they're close by to surface waters to prevent runoff of salt from the salt sheds into those surface waters. So it's fairly comprehensive. There'll also be some funding for staff at AOT and DEC to undertake this process. I hope that answers some of the questions.
Great. So there are a couple more questions online, but we're running a little bit behind. So I want to make sure that we have enough time to go over the state of the lake highlights. And for folks who asked questions that were not answered online, we can work on getting you responses to share with the meeting follow-up materials.
And if we have time at the end, we can also answer those questions. So I think we're calling up the Lake Champlain Basin team next. Thank you, everybody, for your attention with our rollout of this. If you have any feedback on this, we'd love to hear it. If you have questions, follow up, please. We'd love to engage in a conversation. So I'm welcoming the Lake Champlain Basin staff to present key findings from the 2024 State of the Lake Ecosystem Indicators Reports, which is something the Basin Program is commissioned to do every 3 years. And it's to inform communities and resource managers about the health of lake based on the most current scientific data and resource management approaches. We have Dr. Matthew Vaughn with us, who's the chief scientist. We have Meg Modley, who's our aquatic invasive species management coordinator. Colleen Hickey, Colleen Hickey is online, who's our education outreach coordinator. And Jim Brangan, who's our cultural heritage and recreation coordinator and assistant director of the Champlain Valley National Heritage Partnership. And I'm gonna pass it to Matt, who's right over here. Do you want to sit?
Where
or
should I sit or stand?
You can do whatever
usually
you
stand
want,
these
but
things, but you
maybe
want me to sit?
stand.
It's kind of,
Yeah,
where do you want me?
we can slide over. How about that?
You want me to take the chair, chair?
Take the chair. I'm not actually gonna sit in the audience. How about that?
Okay. All right, so I'll be starting us off today, and then I'll tag the other folks in when I wrap up, and I can use this, I guess. So, it's okay if I stand? I'll stand.
Copies of that over there as well, if anybody wants to grab one.
That's where I can point, at least for some of you in the room. Okay, so thanks for that introduction. You explained, the basics. We released a State of Lake report every 3 years, and this is part of our pressure state response model. So pressure, these are things that humans are doing to influence water quality and putting pressures on our ecosystem. And this is the state of a lake where we're using our best monitoring data to understand what the state or condition of our water quality and habitats are right now. And then the response is another piece of our management program where we work with all of our partners, including you all. And that's really, the action plan as part of this is the response is what we're going to do about it. So tonight, we're talking about the state, the latest science. Oh, it's off.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, the latest science, the latest data, putting it into context for you all, provided the interpretation to try to make this useful for you so you can have a better understanding of what's going on with our lake. We kind of divide our work into 4 different goals for Lake Champlain. Those include clean water, healthy ecosystems, an informed and involved public, and thriving communities. So our State of Lake report is broken up into these 4 goals into 4 sections. And so 4 of us on our team will be kind of going through these one by one. And I'll start with clean water. Clean water, of course, this is something that we all want. It's a shared goal. We're all working toward clean water. And in the context of the Clean Water Act, which is the law that ultimately funds the Lake Champlain Basin Program, we're aiming for drinkable, fishable, and swimmable water. And that's actually my son right there, Ethan, who made it into the report this time around. So I didn't get to say at the top, but one of my favorite ways to enjoy the lake is taking my kids and splashing the water. It's one of the Burlington beaches, Ticketsledy Beach. So new in this, the 2024 version of the State of the Lake report, we added a new map with a accompanying infographic. So for the first time, we want to show not precisely, but generally where community public sources of drinking water are drawn from Lake Champlain. And we thought this would be helpful just to provide the context of where people are using the high quality water, drinking water that Lake Champlain provides. So those locations are shown in these yellow dots here. We also provide just some general information. There are 19 public drinking water source suppliers on Lake Champlain, serving about 164,000 people, about 1/4 of the watershed's population. And all of those suppliers test for more than 80 contaminants each year. And Lake Champlain water very rarely exceeds any of those. You'll see details in the report. There was 1 exceedance and it wasn't related. It was more related to infrastructure, not related to the supply from Lake Champlain. So very rarely do we see any exceedances of those contaminants. It's really good news for our high quality drinking water. We also provided updated data on mercury in fish tissue. Of course, mercury is a toxic heavy metal, and we don't want that in our fishery or in our food. So we have consumption advisories for Lake Champlain fish. Mercury is mainly sourced from atmospheric pollution over many decades, and the advances as part of the Clean Air Act has really improved or reduced mercury deposition in our region. And we're seeing that in our lake fish here. And we're seeing in the latest data, which was collected over 2022 and 2023, we're seeing a continued reduction in mercury concentrations. This is really encouraging. And these inform our consumption advisories, which differ for New York, Vermont, and Quebec. So we kind of refer folks to the jurisdiction that you're living in or catching the fish in for those consumption advisories. Lake Champlain has over 40 public beaches on the lake where people like to go and cool off. And as you all probably know, those beaches can sometimes be closed due to water quality concerns. So something we've been doing for the past several versions of this report is providing data and context for how frequently beaches are open or closed due to these concerns. And in this case, we grouped, you can see all the locations of the beaches that we had data for on this map. But for the graphs here, can't point with this thing. The graphs on the right, you're seeing the number of days over a 3-year period since the last report, so 2021, 2022, and 2023, for which the beach was open for swimming in blue, closed due to cyanobacteria blooms in green, or closed due to coliform bacteria or E. coli in purple there. So you can see that generally from Memorial Day to Labor Day over the past 3 years, beaches were open for swimming. So that's about 95% of the days during that recreational season, beaches were open for swimming. About 4% of the days, our beaches were closed due to cyanobacteria blooms, and less than 2% of the days they were closed due to E. coli. So overall, there's a lot of days and places where you can enjoy Lake Champlain, but anytime a beach is closed, that's not okay. We want to reduce those as much as we can. And I also make sure to acknowledge when I'm talking about this, that although, from Memorial Day to Labor Day, the majority of the time beaches are open. When beaches are impacted by cyanobacteria blooms, it's often when it's hottest out and when people want to be swimming. So an example of this, for Burlington beaches, over the past 3 years, in June and August, we're open about 97% of the time. But if you look at the Julys, it was 86% of the time, I think it was. So there's a real impact when the hottest period, May is very different from July when you want to go swimming. So more on cyanobacteria. So cyanobacteria, who here is familiar with cyanobacteria? You're all here, so you're all very informed and involved, I'm sure. Who here has seen a bloom? Most of you. Okay, so I won't talk too much about what it is in general, but of course it is something that's a concern on Lake Champlain, and not just in our lake, but across the country and across the world. This is an emerging concern. We're trying to reduce I don't want to get ahead of myself. In the report, well, actually, let me say this in general, why they happen, and you might know this. But when we have excessive, and this is an infographic in the report, trying to inform people who might not be familiar, who aren't, coming to meetings like this, like you are. So when we have excessive nutrients and calm water, really low wind speeds, calm days, the days when you want to go swimming, right? And the temperature in the water is higher. These all kind of create the conditions that are favorable for cyanobacteria growth, and that can lead to a cyanobacteria bloom, or that's when you can see it with the naked eye. You can see it in the previous photo, kind of the bright green pinhead colors usually is what it looks like. So here we have similar graphs that we just saw for the public beach statuses. This is for routine cyanobacteria monitoring reports. So Lori's team with the Lake Champlain Committee manages an amazing network of community scientist volunteers at over 130 locations, something like that.
Matt, a number of those people are here or online.
Great.
So if they could just, they're part of this great contingent, Jennifer, Bill, a whole bunch of people here that have pulled
Thank
together
you,
that
thank
data.
you.
So we're very, very grateful to them.
So this is your data. Yes, thank you, Lori. Thank you all. This is your data that we're using and it's able to provide this amazing context and information. So what we're showing here are, so you all volunteers know the difference between routine and supplemental reports, right? Routine is the one you do once a week, and supplemental is where you keep reporting if you see a bloom. So we're looking at routine reports only over 2021 to 2023 once again. And here, if you go all the way back to 2013, 94% of the reports that came in for the entire lake were free of cyanobacteria blooms. 94% free of blooms. What you're seeing here is that data over the past 3 years, meaning 21, 23. And what this really highlights, and these sites are grouped by lake segment here. So Northeast Arm, Mallett's Bay, Main Lake, etc. What you're seeing is a real difference between different regions of the lake, right? And that's not a surprise to many of you probably, but we see our greatest prevalence of cyanobacteria blooms in St. Albans Bay and Missisquoi Bay, and much less frequently in Main Lake, South Lake, and Mallett's Bay. I'll also say just briefly in the report, we included more information than we ever have before on cyanotoxin data and testing. We've seen through our results that cyanotoxins are rarely detected in Lake Champlain water. They've never been detected in finished drinking water. In other words, the water that's supplied to customers. There's some more data on, when they have been detected. 4 out of 172 samples over the 3-year period had cyanotoxin levels over the public safety threshold. And those were all in kind of high alert, very pronounced, very visible blooms. And what we've always seen is that when there's no cyanobacteria bloom visible, then there's a very low or almost no chance of detecting cyanotoxin. So that's the good news, and happy to talk more about that. There's questions. So as I said, should we maybe after? So as I said, one of the driving forces for our cyanobacteria blooms and other water quality issues are excessive nutrients. This is mouth of the Otter Creek during Tropical Storm Irene. You can see what you're seeing is a sediment plume, but of course, along with the sediment and lots of water and a flooding event are nutrients that are delivered to the lake. So I'll start by talking about the phosphorus concentration. Concentration just means the measured amount of something like phosphorus in a unit volume of water. So in this case, I'll talk about micrograms per liter. It's just how much phosphorus is in, say, a bottle of water. And this is kind of a blown up version of the graphs I'm going to show for all different parts of the lake. On the vertical axis, you'll see numbers indicating the micrograms per liter, so the phosphorus concentration. And then going side to side, you're seeing in time from 1990 to 2023. And that dotted line is the water quality goal we're shooting for. We want to be below those dotted lines. And we just colored the graph blue if it's below that line for a given year and red if it's above. So we want to see blue, we don't want to see red. And here's that graph for the 12 segments of Lake Champlain, for which we're targeting reductions for the TMDL, Lake Champlain TMDL. And so, as you can see, there are some areas where there's a lot more red than blue. We don't want to see that. So in Missisquoi Bay, St. Albans Bay, oh, it's actually Missisquoi is cut off on the screen. Sorry?
You can see it.
Oh, okay, sorry. Great, yeah, I had a glare there, confused, okay. It's like, okay, so Missisquoi Bay, St. Albans Bay, South Lake, these are all areas where we have consistently higher concentrations than our water quality goals. For Cumberland Bay, Burlington Bay, Shelburne Bay, we're much closer to or below those goals. For about half of these segments in the past 3 years, they had at least 1 year that was below that water quality goal. Overall, the story is that, not surprisingly, we need to reduce these phosphorus concentrations to consistently meet these water quality goals. And that's just a major takeaway from this report. We have some areas that are in better shape than others, but overall, we need to reduce these phosphorus concentrations. How am I on time? What am I supposed to stop or be done with the clean water?
Oh, the agenda's right there.
Just go? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Someone flag me if I'm going over. Okay. So we talked about concentration. When we're thinking about in the lake, we're thinking about concentration. How much is in a bottle of water? When we're thinking about rivers, usually we're thinking about the load, and that's the amount delivered over a period of time. So here I'm going to talk about metric tons per year. So a metric ton is about the mass of an African black rhino. So think about rhinos going down the river. metric tons per year. And here is a really similar graph, but now we're talking about the amount of phosphorus going to these different parts of the lake. Top graph here is for the main lake, the middle is for Mallett's Bay, and the bottom one is for Missisquoi Bay. And again, we're looking at the dotted line, meaning the water quality goal. If we're above that, we're above the goal. If we're below it, then we're below that. We're below that limit, so that's a good thing. So again, a main takeaway is we need to reduce our phosphorus loading to Lake Champlain to meet our goals consistently. The main lake, although there are many years when we're above our loading targets, there are also several years when we're below them. And Mallett's Bay, as you probably know, the main tributary draining to Mallett's Bay is the Lamoille River. And that's one of our 7 tributaries where we're seeing long-term improvements or decreases in phosphorus loads, Lake Champlain. Some encouraging stories there. Missisquoi Bay, consistently above our loading targets for this bay. As you probably could have guessed, it's a major area of focused resources and improvement. But notably in 2021, we had, for the first time, met the phosphorus TMDL for Missisquoi Bay. So it's an encouraging sign. It's a milestone for the bay. And I forgot to mention, actually, I'm going to go back if you don't mind, because I forgot to highlight that since 2018, the phosphorus concentration for Missisquoi Bay has also been decreasing. So encouraging signs for Missisquoi Bay, but still a challenge, of course. So again, we need to reduce these, but there's some nuances and some improvements in some areas. I want to highlight just the huge success story we've had with our wastewater treatment facility loading, phosphorus loading to Lake Champlain. This is a very similar graph as you saw before, but now we're looking at wastewater treatment facility or phosphorus from wastewater treatment facilities from 1990 to 2023, grouped by jurisdiction. So Quebec is in purple, Vermont's in green, New York's in blue, and these are all going down. So it's a success story, and we're all 3 jurisdictions are well below the TMDL limits. So you all talked about chloride contamination a bit. So thanks for setting the stage. This is a concern for Lake Champlain, and we have just a simple graph showing the overall chloride levels in Lake Champlain. They've risen 20 to 54% since 1992, which is the first year we have data. And especially in the last decade or so, we've seen some pretty dramatic increases, not just in the lake, but also in our tributaries as well. And that's discussed further in the report. We also added a new section in the State of the Lake report on flooding. This, of course, is top of mind for our communities. Well, about a year ago, I gave a full talk to the Vermont CSC on the water quality impacts of the 2023 July flood and a bit on the August flooding. Of course, we've had another more major flood since then, especially the one that came a year later from the July flood. So we included an infographic on the effects of the July 2023 flood event. We received, the basin received 3 to 9 inches of rain over a 48-hour period, resulting in a 10 times increase in river flows. That delivered about 100 metric tons. Remember, we were talking about metric tons earlier per year, but now we're talking about in one day delivered to Lake Champlain. And about in a period of a 7-day period after the start of the storm, it was about 300 metric tons, which is about half of the annual TMDL targeted load for the lake. So really, really remarkable amount of phosphorus and sediment and water and other contaminants potentially as well. About 300 billion gallons of water were delivered to Lake Champlain during that 7-day period. And it resulted in a 3-foot rise in lake level. And if there's questions, I can talk about how this year's flooding compared, but for the report, that hadn't happened yet. That was released in June, so. And this is another, I think this is my last graph. So thank you for bearing with me with the graphs. But this again is showing phosphorus loading, again, in metric tons per year in the vertical axis. And every line there represents a year since 1990. And you're going from October 1st to September 30th. And people who study water start the year in October 1st because that way the winter doesn't get broken up into two pieces. Okay, we call it a water year. So every line is a year. The purple is kind of the average, and the highlighted blue line is last year, 2023. So what it's showing is how the phosphorus loading to the lake was actually below average going into July. And then the major July 2023 flood bumped up the phosphorus loading to higher than average, but still not as high as it's ever been. So this just kind of puts that flooding into context. Yes, it was a major water quality event for the basin. It had a real impact in the lake, especially on water clarity and recreation for the few weeks following the storm. But it did not compare to the impacts we saw, for example, in 2011, which is shown in that top gray line there. 2011 was remarkable, not just for the late August flooding, but also for the spring as well. I'm just rambling on. Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Question, I'm not sure if you can answer. What's EPA's position of that data point from July 23 relative to compliance and state overall compliance with the Lake Champlain TMDL? They recognize that as an outlier? Does it matter? Just curious to know what their position is on that specific event.
Yeah, so my understanding is did the online folks hear that? Okay. The question was, I think, what was EPA's position on the flooding of July 2023 in the context of TMDL loading, right?
Yep.
So my understanding is that they're looking holistically on the state's efforts to meet the TMDL goals. And the TMDL does have kind of assurances or buffer built in for events like this. And there's going to be year to year variability. So that, go back. This kind of shows how, when you have a flood like this, it's going to bring us above average, but it's not sending us to the stratosphere. And really, what we need to do is meet our goals with this variability. And with climate change, we're going to be even more variable. So, we're all talking about the flooding from 23 and 24, but also not as significant, but certainly significant are the dryness of 21 and 22. And that contributed to, the lower phosphorus loading that we saw to Missisquoi Bay and the main lake in 21, 22. Not as newsworthy and not as impactful for our communities because it didn't cause infrastructure damage and all these other issues. But we're seeing dry years, wet years, and that's just kind of the reality of looking at.
We've had a dry fall since July.
Yep.
It's gonna happen. And so turn to the back of a year ago.
Right.
Could you address the mechanisms that reduce the phosphorus in the lake?
Yes. Sorry, what? Yes, the question was about mechanisms that reduce phosphorus in the lake. Right. So starting uphill of the lake, there are a lot of efforts underway to reduce the amount of phosphorus going to the lake. So that's kind of step one. That's what a lot of our resources are going toward. So helping, farms implement best practices, helping municipalities implement stormwater practices. And so that's kind of briefly one part of it. In the lake, Mother Nature at this point takes over, and phosphorus can be kind of used up by things growing in the lake. It can be buried in sediment, or it can kind of move out of the system, essentially north of the Richelieu River. So one thing, unlike other elements or nutrients like nitrogen or carbon or oxygen that can kind of go up and down through the water and atmosphere in these really cool biogeochemical fluxes, phosphorus is kind of stuck in the lake and can get kind of recirculated between the water and the sediment, but it doesn't go away as easily. So that's one of the issues that we're working with, something we call legacy phosphorus. So over decades or centuries, really, there's been, an excess of phosphorus being delivered to the lake, and it's stored in those lake bottom sediments. And in some areas where it's shallow enough for the sediments to be near the surface, that phosphorus can be released. And we included in this report an illustration to show the kind of the science behind that, under what conditions phosphorus can be released into the lake, drive cyanobacteria blooms, then get buried, and then can actually be released again. So it's kind of a cyclical pattern there. But in the deeper parts of the lake, it can get buried and kind of be removed from the system that way. Another rambling answer, but happy to chat later if you're
Yeah.
want to talk more.
I know there are lots of questions about the clean water
Sorry.
slides. That's okay. And there's several online too, but I think we're gonna go through the rest of the report and then do questions at the end. And again, if we don't get to your question live, we will get you an answer following the meeting.
And timeline, we're done at 7 to.
Yep.
So the end of the day. Okay, but this is all we have left to talk about is this report. So.
Oh, we can talk and talk and
We can
talk.
talk
Yeah.
and talk.
Hi, everybody. Meg Motley. I focus on aquatic invasive species and healthy ecosystems at the Basin Program. So in the healthy ecosystems section, we're really talking about the habitat and the critters. There's a lot of really great things going on with protecting habitats, restoring native species. We talk about the threats of invasive species and climate change. And so just to start off with biodiversity and habitat connectivity in this chapter of the report, some of the great things that we celebrate, we have over 90 different species of fish in the lake. We have a lot of active angling groups that come here and recreate and invest in our economy. The Fish and Wildlife agencies at the state and the federal level are investigating and watching bass populations, which is a huge attraction in Lake Champlain, and they report that the bass are growing in number and size. So that is something positive to bring people here. But we're also interested in, you know, the anglers report breaking fish catch records and things to that that effect. So we have a lot to protect in the watershed. I focus a lot on invasive species. There are over 80% of our lakes in the state of Vermont are invasive free, and 75% of the lakes in the Adirondack region are invasive free. So there's a lot of focus there. And one of the big stories in the last 3 years has really been about our lake trout population in the lake and how the lake trout are not only reproducing, but they're recruiting. So what that means is they're reproducing, and then we're able to find years 1 through 9 and even greater than that in the lake that have not been stocked. So we're getting this recovery of lake trout in the lake. And in 2023, the agencies agreed to reduce stocking by half in Lake Champlain, and that's on target and putting us in a direction of lake trout recovery in the lake. So that's another really great success story for Lake Champlain. One piece that we felt was missing in the report was a focus on aquatic organism passage, which Karina introduced already. So we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, except for the fact that we wanted to explain to the public a little bit more about what aquatic organism passage issues might look like. So here is an obvious example of a dam. This is Indian Rapids Dam on the Saranac River in New York, and what the removal and restoration of connecting the stream back to its flow and reconnecting it to its floodplain might look like. But we focused with staff members in our office to put together an infographic to highlight the idea of what it looks like across our landscape when you layer roads with streams, and the number of places that we have culverts, the quantity of culverts that we have across the watershed that can provide challenges for insects, salamanders, fish, turtles to move up and downstream freely at these pinch points. And so Karina actually shared a few of these photographs already, but just asking the public to think a little bit about culverts that have really high velocity moving through them. Organisms can't move upstream in that situation. Plug culverts are a problem, and perch culverts, when the culvert outflow is offset from the downstream side, it's very hard for organisms to move across that. And then in the bottom right corner, you can see what an improved culvert installed might look like, so that the water and the critters can move back and forth freely there. And in this assessment, data was pulled together that showed of over 8,000 culverts that were assessed across the watershed, only 6% offered full passage for aquatic organisms. And so we have a huge amount of work to do in terms of resizing culverts, improving culverts, and working on that in the watershed. Switching over to think a little bit more about the bigger impediments, so the dams in the watershed, and through the lens of the landlocked Atlantic salmon, a salmon will return to the tributaries in the lower reaches to spawn every year, and they've had limited access because of dams to some of our major tributaries in Lake Champlain. But a lot of that has been restored, and the major impediments still remain in the Missisquoi River for Atlantic salmon, as well as in the Saranac River. And so zooming in the lower left corner, you'll see there were 2 dams that were removed. So Indian Rapids Dam, you saw the pictures of their removal, and then the Fredenberg Falls Dam were removed in 2023. And that's a really great success story because there is a fish passage planned for the Imperial Dam downstream of those 2 dams. So when we put all of it together, if the fish passage gets installed in Imperial Mills Dam, those landlocked Atlantic salmon will be able to move upstream an additional, I believe it's like 13 or 18 miles for the first time in 250 years, and have access to a huge amount of spawning area. And in other cases, we have on the Winooski River, the trap and truck program that you might have heard of at the Winooski 1 Dam. They collect the fish and they lift them over the dam. And what they're doing is they're taking them upstream to a 20-mile stretch of spawning habitat upstream, so they can spawn and the offspring can float back down into Lake Champlain. Relative to our lake trout and our Atlantic salmon, no healthy ecosystem section is complete without reports on our sea lamprey management in Lake Champlain, which is largely coordinated by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with the state agencies. So the sea lamprey, once they become adults, they're parasites in the lake, and they attach to our Atlantic salmon and lake trout, and they can basically suck the life out of these fish. So the state agencies and the feds collect fish, and they do an inventory to see how many have sea lamprey wounds on them. And so for the first time in the management history in the last 3 years, both target wounding rates were met for both the lake trout for the first time, and Atlantic salmon for 3 years in a row. So that's a really big success story. There's a lot of different factors that can be affecting that, but it's nice to see that reduction in wounding rate. Switching over to aquatic invasive species, this is our uninvited and not present yet guest, the round goby, which you may have heard about quite a bit. It's an invasive benthic fish that's moved across the Erie Canal system and is coming up the Champlain Canal. It's also in the St. Lawrence system and trying to come up the Richelieu River towards Lake Champlain. And it will displace a lot of our benthic species and can cause a number of other impacts to Lake Champlain. We track the number of known non-native and invasive species present in the lake, and it's really important to note that the definition of an invasive species is one that's non-native, but also is causing some kind of harm to the environment, to human health, or to the economy. And so the darker shaded blue-green species, of which there are just about over a dozen, are classified or measured to cause harm. So there are 51 known non-native and invasive species present in the lake. Many of those non-natives you will see we intentionally put in the lake for our recreational enjoyment and fishing. So the last invasive species that entered and became established in Lake Champlain was the fishhook water flea in 2018. And unfortunately, just recently, a few weeks ago, we found Corbicula fluminea, which is the golden clam in the South Lake, by a volunteer monitor that was trained by the Lake Champlain Committee and funded through the Lake Champlain Basin Program. That species we have not considered established yet. We've just found it present, so it may end up on the charts in the next report. We did update the number of known non-native and invasives in surrounding water bodies to Lake Champlain. So this includes about 190 in the Great Lakes, Most of those species arrive through ballast water. There have been International Maritime Organization rules that have changed, and there's inter-ocean transfer of the ballast water that's now reduced the number of species that come into the Great Lakes. But once established in the Great Lakes, that's a great source of invasives that can move and become established in the Northeast. So we are connected to all of these systems by canalways, the Erie Canal running, across sort of a band of southern New York, my southern New York, not true southern New York, upstate New York to the rest of the world. So the Champlain Canal then connects the Erie Canal from the Hudson up to the southern end of Lake Champlain. And then we have the Chambly Canal on the Richelieu River that brings watercraft around rapids and such that connects Lake Champlain to the St. Lawrence system. So these organisms can move across the landscape in a number of ways, but this graphic in particular, we're focusing on that open canal pathway that crosses divides that organisms would not normally be able to cross on their own. So some of the invasives that we're worried about coming to Lake Champlain include the round goby. In the middle, you'll see the picture of quagga mussel, which is sort of the evil twin to the invasive zebra mussel that we have in Lake Champlain, and hydrilla, which is quoted by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to be worse than Eurasian water milfoil. It's a very aggressive aquatic plant. There's a new strain of it in the Connecticut River that we are heavily tracking, and there are populations in New York that are being actively managed. And just to show our connectivity to the rest of the surrounding Northeast through our Boat Launch Steward program, we record the last body of water that watercraft have visited before they come to Lake Champlain. The majority of watercraft that are launching into Lake Champlain were last in Lake Champlain. But for those that were not, we've summarized the top 10 water bodies that they are coming from. So you can see that we have direct connections from watercraft that are being trailered and brought to Lake Champlain from places in New Hampshire, from the Hudson River, from the St. Lawrence River. So we have pretty good connectivity and opportunities for hitchhikers to inadvertently be introduced, which reinforces the need for spread prevention and boat inspection, decontamination, following bait fish regulations, etc. Water chestnut. This is a big program that we have been working on in the southern end of Lake Champlain and really throughout the watershed for decades. It came in through the Champlain Canal in the mid 1940s. We have been managing it from north to south in the lake, and the densest populations you can see in 1999 expanded all the way north of Crown Point. Those populations have been pushed further south than the Dresden Narrows using mechanical harvesting, and that's conducted when the water is deep enough and the density of the water chestnut is greater than 25% in an area. So it's worthwhile to mechanically harvest. We're mechanically harvesting it because it's an annual plant with a nutlet, and if you can remove that nutlet and that from the plant before the nutlet drops, it's a short field season, but it is an effective method, and we've been able to push the densest populations further south. There are a few other satellite populations in the northern lake that have popped up recently. So we're concerned about a population outside of the Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge. The Black Creek marsh population has been largely eliminated and will continue to survey and remove, but it's very likely that in the next 5 years, we may have 3 years of no detect, which is great. So if you can get in after these infestations quickly after they're found and manage them, it is possible to reduce the populations and eliminate them. So here's a picture of the mechanical harvester in the South Lake. And then there's also a section in the report on changing climate. And there's a lot of pieces in this section about how our forests may be shifting with species. It talks about forest pests and pathogens. We talk about the increased likelihood of flooding events and the contrast between flooding events and droughts that might facilitate invasive species spread. And so pointing out that, we really do need to focus on habitat restoration. But in the climate change section, the most popular graphic with the public is this barcode that shows basically the surface freeze over of Lake Champlain in the last few, 100+ years. And unfortunately, as you're seeing, the blue represents freeze over, ice surface freeze over, and red represents the lake did not fully freeze over. And so with work that Matt has done from our team in looking out ahead, by 2050, it may be likely that the lake freezes over only 1 in 10 years. And that has a number of different impacts on the things that live in the lake, the growing season, many different aspects. So that is our healthy ecosystem section summary. And I think Colleen is online for informed and involved.
Colleen, if you want to come off mute and then you can let me know when to advance your slides.
That sounds great, Katie. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm not there in person. The informed and involved public section of this State of the Lake plan is a little bit short, but in part it's because all of you who are online and in the room tonight are likely involved in one way or another of helping the lake into the future. So we'll stay the course with a couple of the sections of data that appeared in the report. This slide, for example, exemplifies the role of teachers. Yeah, that's okay, Katie. Teachers here with their students in the river, as well as the role of universities and getting the students out on research boats to understand the hard science behind the lake. For many of these students, whether it's going to the river or going out on a research vessel, it's the first time they've been in these locations on the lake. And there's nothing better than experiencing the lake firsthand in order to fully comprehend how important it is to get outdoors and learn the science. Okay, Katie? We launched a public awareness survey in 2021, and that was implemented through the Lake Champlain Sea Grant Program, the University of Vermont Lake Champlain Committee, and an advisory committee who really put an awful lot of effort into finding the appropriate questions to ask and analyzing the data when it came back. Next slide. We'll dive a little deeper here. Go ahead, Katie, with the next slide.
Not responding. Hold on.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. I'll take a look at this side. Well, I can, there you go. 1,675 people responded to the survey from Quebec, New York, and Vermont. They all did an incredible job. They all had good returns. Quebec had to respond hard copy in the mail. So they received that survey in the mail and gave us their responses nonetheless. So it was a great representation across the entire watershed. 97% believe the healthy waterways are a critical part of thriving communities, so they clearly understand that connection. And 92% believe that their actions affect water quality. 66% know how to find information about protecting water quality. But interestingly, look at how they really vary in their preferred methods of receiving information. Websites and brochures were about equal. We were glad to see that both TV and radio still provided a really decent perspective on the issues facing the lake. If there are media present tonight, it's a shout out to how you are such a multiplier effect for the stories that all of our organizations have to share and tell about the lake, but you have the ability to reach the masses much better than we do. And we appreciate the work you do on the ground every day. I just wanted to give you 2 examples of recent efforts in the media in the last 3 years. One is through the University of Vermont, who started fostering the next generation of sort of environmental reporters when its community news service launched Stories of the Lake, a program which students wrote stories for local news outlets. That's continuing again this year. On the New York shoreline, we can give you the example of Adirondack Explorer actually employs a water reporter who's doing a phenomenal job on the stories of the especially the river systems in New York, as well as Lake Champlain. So the media is changing it up, and working on new technologies and trying to find new ways to reach the public all the time. 49% of the people in the survey knew about efforts in their own communities to protect and improve water quality. This next statistic is rather interesting. 10% engaged in 4 or more stewardship actions. And you may say that's not a lot, but that's a good start. We have 400,000 people. Almost 600,000 people who live and work in the Lake Champlain watershed. And over 55% responded that they have taken at least one action on behalf of the lake. So yes, there's plenty more work to do, but people are learning how to engage within the watershed. And Katie, I'm just going to have you skip to the next one. It'll have the same map, a little bit bigger. Whoops, a little one back. Thank you. So this is the distribution of the Lake Champlain Boat Launch Steward Program for the years 2021 to 2023. We're beyond the 15th year of the program at this point. And this program is a partnership with the Adirondack Watershed Institute and OBVBM, which is our one of our watershed partners north of the border in Quebec. They help to assume the coordination of the program, and it makes sure that we have consistency within the 3 jurisdictions in terms of methodology and the tracking to help prevent the spread of invasives. You can see the partnerships extend from the north all the way to the South Bay and Lake Champlain. In addition, you can see a few red circles on there with data that you can see more clearly in the actual printed version or online. But the red circles show the locations of decontamination stations, which are another critical element of getting those boats clean so that they don't carry invasives. Next slide. So 152,000 people actually were reached by the boat launch stewards from all of those jurisdictions between 2021 and 2023. 13% of the surveyed watercraft carried aquatic hitchhikers. So if Meg has been after me to figure out how to use the term interception, I think the easiest way to explain it is football season. So I think many of you do understand that concept. These boat launch stewards in those 3 years intercepted 793 species on boats, which had launched in Lake Champlain. They also intercepted, and maybe even more importantly, 4,669 aquatic invasive species on boats that are being taken out of the lake. So they're both incoming and outgoing, and by far, the stewards were able to intercept on those boats that are going to other locations after they have visited Champlain. So we all have a lot of responsibility in making sure those boats are clean, drained, and dry. Next slide. Okay, individual actions are critically important for the Lake Champlain watershed. Again, many of the groups represented here tonight and individuals have taken action already. But in the next slide, Katie, I think we should be able to see a couple of the logos that you may be familiar with. Lake Champlain Committee, of course, runs the cyanobacteria monitoring that's really done by volunteers along the shoreline areas, especially. And they also assist with a native plant and animal survey process. And I think Meg may have talked about the golden mussel as well this summer that was discovered through the efforts of the volunteers for the Lake Champlain Committee. And of course, they work in partnership with the states and feds as well. Don't pee on your lawn. You've probably heard that historically. It's about not using phosphorus fertilizers on your lawns. You'll see that reinvigorated campaign in the next year or two. For the past 5 years, we've been using Raise the Blade, which is getting homeowners to raise the blade on their lawnmower to 3 inches or higher, clipping no more than 1/3 of the blade at a time. The goal, of course, is to build up the compost a layer in the soil so it's earthier, it can retain more stormwater, and it doesn't head down down the street, down the drain, down to the lake. Streamwise has been in existence for about 3 years. I think this summer marked the 4th year. Again, this is a program that's done in New York, Vermont, and Quebec. And instead of working along the lakeshore of Lake Champlain and inland lakes like we do for the Lakewise program through the state of Vermont, Streamwise takes it up a notch into the upper reaches of the watershed. Again, the goal is to reduce stormwater from coming downstream. I think just a couple more, Katie. And actually, this will be the last slide here, but what you can do. So again, so many partners. We just had our first Clean Water Youth Summit in May of 2023. The Champlain Basin Education Initiative has launched its about 8th session for teachers. It's a 10-day training program. And again, the partners on this call are involved. But if you think about what the 16 teachers who are participating in this nearly year-long program are doing, they're in fact reaching over 600 students with just 16 people. So getting to the core people who can influence and assist and help with education is really important. We know from the resource room at ECHO, it's the one room that the Basin program staffs 7 days a week. In that room, we represent so many of the organizations on this call and that are working within the entire watershed. And part of our goal is to inform those visitors. We had 34,000 last year alone in 2023. Inform those visitors of local actions that can be taken by them and their families and their neighbors and communities, but also to connect them back to local watershed groups within their own communities so that they can drill down a little further and get more actively involved. We have a long tradition of involving arts in the communities. I think Jim will share a couple of slides about the Artist in Residence program in all 3 jurisdictions. And I'd just like to say that, again, with working with media and multiple partners carrying the same messages, we're far more effective than if any one organization tries to go it alone. The last thing I'll say that is been brought up this summer, just after the State of the Lake report finished, is if you don't have access to be able to get out and hike the mountains and explore the watershed, the Basin program has been working with local partners on a Summit to Shore program. If you head to our website, you can explore the Winooski, Missisquoi, and Sable rivers at this point in time, all winter, right from your desk or armchair. And Hillary spoke earlier about the Poultney Meadowy is the next up on the list, and you'll see the video footage from that beautiful watershed this spring. I'll stop there, Katie, and we'll wait for questions after Jim. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Colleen. So Colleen and I are sort of some of the tools in the toolbox that helps the Lake Champlain Basin program get the word out about water quality and invasive species and all the other topics that we work on. And welcome to Shelburne. I've lived here for 25 years. It's great to have you here. And just a quick segue. I saw the fire engines backing back in after a call probably for a wreck on those icy roads tonight. And it reminded me of one of my earliest experiences on the fire department. When, as you know, firefighters love to wash their trucks. We like a nice clean fire truck. And when I first started after the first couple of months washing trucks, I noticed that one of the firefighters was dumping the suds down the drain, which goes into the stormwater into Lake Champlain. And I said to the guy, and this is just after I started working for the Lake Champlain Basin program, I was like, is there phosphorus in that detergent that you're dumping down the lake into the lake? And he's like, you know what? I don't care what goes into Lake Champlain. Lake Champlain has nothing to do with me. And of course, that hurt me deep down inside. And the funny thing about that is that firefighter, the next summer, might have been the summer afterwards, bought a boat for water skiing. And after he bought that boat for water skiing, he started talking to me about Lake Champlain's water quality. And I started noticing him dumping the suds out on the grass outside the fire station. And the reason why I'm telling you this story is that the crux of the work that I do and a lot of the work that Colleen does is create that link between appreciation, understanding, and stewardship. If you have an opportunity to get people out onto Lake Champlain or learning about the history of Lake Champlain, you get that little nudge in there. And once they get the appreciation, they start wanting to learn more. And once they learn a little bit more, the better stewards they become. And so one of the tools in our toolbox is the Champlain Valley National Heritage Partnership. We were established back in 2006, really didn't get running or real funding until about 2011. But the heritage area allows us to go beyond the Lake Champlain Basin, but it also allows us to touch audiences that you can't really touch with the education outreach programs, and allows us to offer programs that help train the next generation of people who are manning the visitor centers and the museums and that sort of thing. So we have a grants program, very robust. We have about $300,000 in grants every year just through the heritage area. And those grants include internships, help train that next generation of folks. Collections grants, we have tremendous amount of fantastic museums here that may need a little bit of help with their collections, whether it's inventorying them, cataloging them, displaying them, interpreting them. We also have local heritage grants that have students learn about their community by visiting historic sites, natural sites, and interpreting those sites through the arts. And then the fourth of our core grants are called interpretive themes. So the interpretive theme grants focus on one of the interpretive themes for the heritage area. The first is Making of Nations. The second is Corridor of Commerce. And the third is Conservation and Community. And conservation and community interpretive theme really dovetails well with the Lake Champlain Basin programs work. And we have had a tremendous amount of success using those themes, matching them with an anniversary or a special event coming up, and really focusing in on that. The fifth category for our grants are special program grants, and this ties in directly to the anniversary of the 250th anniversary of the program that I'm showing here. Is the exploration and documentation of the gunboat Spitfire that sank on October 11th, 1776, after the Battle of Valcour. And so this work's been done by the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. If you have an opportunity to check out their website, please do. There's some really great things going on, including a 3D photogrammetry model developed of the gunboat itself. Recreation plays a huge role in this as well. Again, if you have an opportunity to get on the lake, I love to canoe. It gives you a sense of you want to learn more. You want to protect what you're doing. Our wayside exhibit program, almost 400 wayside exhibits. You've all seen them. You all love them. We also have provided funding and support for Lake Champlain bikeways and the Western New England Greenway. And also I want to point out the real great opportunity we had in 2019 with the International Year of the Salmon. Some of the work that Meg was describing with the salmon, opening up some of those corridors for the salmon to travel further upstream. We worked with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service very closely to develop some pretty great programming there. And that continues every year. We have these mobile interpretive displays that have interpreted salmon, the women's suffrage movement, the opening of the canals, and most recently the biosphere. And this community engagement pays off. There's an image of the fishing workshops that Meg and other members of our staff have promoted and staffed, that have worked with well over 300 new Americans and people of underserved communities. So this is a great way for people to understand the regulations around fishing, learn how to fish, interact with law enforcement agents, to not have that fear of law enforcement. And also just kind of to give them an opportunity to learn a little bit more about Lake Champlain. So hopefully that builds a sense of understanding to appreciation. And I also want to say that the community engagement has really paid off. Just in Champlain Valley National Heritage Partnership grants alone, about 50 in the last 3 years. We have sponsored, you can all read those. Just for example, we've had sponsored 2,000 students with 327 teachers, 62 class trips. Here's the kicker. In the last 5 years, our volunteers, 539 different volunteers have provided over 10,000 hours of volunteer time. And that volunteer time is worth $1.1 million. That is a significant amount. And that tells me that we have people that are engaged, that people want their communities to thrive, that there's a real opportunity here for us to build upon this, to create continue to sustain a holistic approach to Lake Champlain. When I first started working for the Basin program, I believe I was the only cultural heritage and recreation coordinator funded through EPA funds. And my very first meeting, one of the EPA reps was arguing that they should get rid of my position. Welcome to your new job, Jim. But that man right there in the corner argued to keep us going. And thank you, Buzz. I'll never forget that. But it's been really, really important to bring in new audiences that can help us with those phosphorus levels, to help us prevent the invasive species from coming into Lake Champlain, to enable some of our native species to travel further up the tributaries. Lastly, I want to talk about the Artist in Residence program. We have, in recent years, developed an Artist in Residence program that helps with that appreciation, understanding, stewardship. We have sponsored several different programs, and I'll just point out a couple here. The first is Friends of the Winooski River, worked with 3 schools, 1 elementary, 1 middle school, and 1 high school to do art based on the watersheds they live in. This crew did a lot of different work. I think they're Edmonds Elementary School, and they were playing in the creek, developing different types of art, finger paints for the refrigerator. The gentleman on the right-hand side, his name is Dave Fadden. He's a Mohawk artist, worked with Blue Seed Studio over in Saranac Lake. They contacted Kurt Steger, professor of geology at Paul Smith's College. Kurt was good enough to give them an understanding of how the water quality issues around Lake Champlain. And we had 6 artists to start with. We wound up with 8. Fantastic opportunity for the arts community to get engaged. What's more important, a beautiful painting on the wall of a museum that interprets water quality, or a finger painting on a refrigerator? I'm not sure. I think they're both really, really important. I just also want to give a quick shout out to one of our local Artist in Residence program, which is at the Clemens Family Farm. They are working with the African American experience on Lake Champlain and using the beluga whale found in 1849 in Charlotte as a sort of a symbol for forgotten history that's rediscovered. And I just had to show this beautiful selfie of 2 of the artists at Mystic Aquarium getting photobombed by a beluga whale. And lastly, we have the Champlain Adirondack Biosphere Network. CAC was established in 1989. So was the Champlain Adirondack Biosphere. Nominated by the Department of State. It includes all the Lake Champlain Basin and all the Adirondack Park. It's one of the biggest biospheres in the Western Hemisphere. Katie Dar has done a phenomenal job in getting the ball re-rolling again with the biosphere. And this program is just wrapping up with our interpretive theme focus for 2024. About 7 or 8 grants, or about $250,000 of funding went into this, bringing in young people to focus on the biosphere and the climate change and just the issues facing not just Lake Champlain, but also the planet itself. I think I did that in 9 minutes. I wanted to do it in 7. So, any questions for me or any of my colleagues? Yes.
But I noticed a slide earlier, Shelburne Bay had one of the higher levels for phosphorus content. And I'm also, when you were talking about the fire trucks, it made me think, there are 3 car washes that are literally on the lip of Shelburne Bay. You have Champ, you have the new one that went in, that's huge, and then you have the one up top. Is there regulation on their runoff? If we talk about the runoff from one fire truck, and then we have these 3, they're literally on the edge of Shelburne Bay.
Yes, I've noticed all 3, but I will leave it to our phosphorus expert, Matt Vaughn, to answer that question. Do you want that?
Yeah, so car washes and other businesses will treat effluent or waste like that. It'll be treated in the sewer through the wastewater treatment facility that uses several different phosphorus removal technologies to remove nutrients before it enters. Sorry.
I think Shelburne's in the process of revamping.
Oh, right, the
Yeah.
facility, exactly.
So do
Yeah.
those things get factored in terms of a town when they're making those decisions?
Absolutely, yeah, the amount of wastewater expected to, need to be treated, growth in the future, that's all, I mean, we're in the building, this is where it happens, right? So yes, I think this, I wasn't there, but I think the story was down a storm drain. So those do drain directly to our waterways.
Fact that you see the bay is high phosphates and then we concentrated major car washes on the bay.
Right, and the nice thing about what we call point sources of pollution, you can point to them, you can treat them, you can deal with them appropriately, in this case, in a wastewater treatment facility. The non-point sources on the landscape are much harder to address, and that's a lot of where our resources go.
There were a couple of questions online from earlier for you,
For
Matt.
me, a lot
Yeah.
here, okay.
Why do we show an increase in mercury in fish around 2016?
Yeah, great question. So I think I should just go back to that probably. Okay, here, so you'll see, mercury was decreasing, and this was as it was reported after the 2011 study as a great success story. Improvements to the Clean Air Act reduced the amount of mercury that's deposited from atmospheric deposition onto our region across the Northeast. And we were seeing that in our data in Lake Champlain. And then we got a surprise in 2016 and 17 surveys, it increased, and we didn't know why. And we still are learning why. We have an ongoing study right now in partnership with Dartmouth College that's looking at some really fancy techniques using isotopes of mercury to understand where mercury is coming from in our water, in our sediments, and in our fish. So about 6 to 8 months, we'll have kind of final results on a better understanding of why it increased in 2016 and 17 and really where mercury that's going into our fish is coming from.
Great. Can you comment on this remark? The Missisquoi blooms are mainly coming from the Quebec side. No. That was one of the comments in the chat. So
Okay.
No.
So not necessarily.
No.
No. So Missisquoi Bay, we have frequent, during the kind of warmer months, we have frequent, persistent, and widespread cyanobacteria blooms on the Vermont and New York and Quebec side.
But they're wondering if the blooms are coming from
Like if they
Quebec, or
start
if
there
they
and
start there
spread?
and come down, or if the nutrients are.
I'm not
Not
sure,
sure.
Okay.
but Diana, if you want to
follow up
follow up on that,
Yeah, that would be great.
we can get you another answer. there are a couple more online, but we can take a break for some in the room if there are questions.
I've got a question. Karina, you were talking about, there was some number like 95% of fluoride comes from private land,
75.
some big number.
That fluoride was low.
Okay.
75% comes from private
I'm
applicants.
sure that private landowners aren't spreading that much chloride. It must be coming off public highways and things going on to private land. I was wondering if there's, because it comes off private land, is that a stumbling block for legislators? Do they not understand the source?
Now, do you have results in your study more? You want to speak to that first? And then I can
I actually don't have, I'm not familiar with that statistic, the 75% for private land, so I can't speak to that.
Thought Denise, did you say that?
I thought Katie, you gave me.
Yeah, so that, and I'm gonna look back into the presentation notes, which I don't have on this screen. It was 70% of fluoride, something connected to private lands. I'm not remembering that nuance, but that came from our meeting with Secretary Moore last year.
Yeah.
So I'll double check what exactly that phrasing was, so we can get that nuance.
Because I think we also have maybe potentially conflicting information noting that a lot of what has been attributed in Lake Champlain has been from winter application. And a lot of that is seen as municipalities, which is, you know, the impetus behind actions in New York and what we're trying to follow through on in Vermont as well is to reduce that, look at alternatives, reduce that amount of fluoride.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I was wondering if when you have flooding and the lake fills up with stuff. And then like in this year, for example, we had a huge rise in water and now it's really, really low. Does that mean that things get more concentrated or that they've gone out? How does that, all that water go
The
away?
sediment deposits are shifting the landscape of the lake. From
Yeah.
these floods, massive, I saw it
Yeah.
in the summers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was back.
Do you want me to ramble for a minute about that?
You can ramble.
Actually, this is another little wondering that I was having when you were talking about the sediments
Yeah.
that release the phosphorus over time,
Yeah.
you know, that's been there for a while.
Yeah.
And so like what I've noticed about a cyano bloom is that typically if you're swimming before, you see these little silver flecks kind of in the water. And then next thing you go off. But do you know what those things are? They
It depends, okay.
Let's repeat the question.
Yeah, okay,
first,
there's a bunch of stuff there.
Yeah.
about like evaporation and
Yeah, so I think we'll start off with, lake levels go up and down, and does that mean things are more concentrated? It's a great question.
After everything gets dumped in, yeah, what happens?
Yeah, and then there's so maybe we'll start with that. So yes, lake levels are impact or influenced by the amount of water going in. It's like a bathtub with a faucet, right, and a drain. So we have a lot of we have several rivers, over 25 rivers leading to Lake Champlain. So that's your input. And then the main output is through the Richelieu River north into Quebec. And then you also have evaporation, just, sun drying the lake essentially. So those are your main ins and outs. Because water is always coming in from the rivers at a certain concentration of phosphorus or nitrogen or whatever it is, the concentration does change based on those inputs and outputs. But there's a lot of factors that go into it. One of those things is how things that are living in the lake are using up nutrients. Things are living and dying every day. Bacteria, algae, phytoplankton, all sorts of things, fish, of course. But essentially, the answer is no. When the lake level goes down, it doesn't mean that things are just more concentrated. If it were all evaporation, that would make it more concentrated. But the main factor for water level is inputs in the rivers and the output through the Richelieu River, the outlet of the lake. Maybe I'll move on to the next one. Then for the sediment kind of being delivered to the lake, it's a natural process for sediment to be moved to a lake by rivers and to change the way the mouth of a river looks. That's why we have river deltas. And I showed the photo of the Otter Creek Delta there. It looks like a crow's foot. That's because of the deposition of sediment over hundreds, thousands of years. When you have a major event like we had the past 2 years, that can really change the landscape near the mouths of those rivers. And that, can make it shallower in certain places, deeper in other places. And wave action and other floods can scour or deposit sediment kind of over the course of years and decades and centuries. So that's a natural process, but it's also impacted by the way humans use the landscape and can cause more erosion, more sediment being deposited. Another just complex process that depends on the location we're talking about. Things you see in the water, you could be seeing diatoms, you could be a diatom bloom, which are harmless, but a natural part of the ecosystem. You could be seeing cyanobacteria blooms. You could be seeing a different type of, actually be seeing zooplankton. There's a lot of things living in our lake that could be. So maybe the best thing to do is to
Join your.
ask,
team.
yeah, exactly. Ask questions, take photos, take video, call it in.
Join Lake Champlain.
Bring,
July, August.
I'll put it-
E. coli or cyano, which they're gonna be, and if it's E. coli, like I had 5.5 inches in 24 hours. It was a
Wow.
no one to test for E. coli.
okay, yeah.
And then I can watch the upper farm field, and when their last puddle goes, I know within 2 weeks, I need to retest E. coli, and then I'm gonna.
Wow, it's really
So
interesting.
the more you get to know your watershed,
Mhm.
you don't really time things, but it's the running up, is it E. coli or is it cyan?
Just what I'll just take the opportunity to put a plug in for our resource room in the Echo Center for Lake Champlain. This is open to the public, free for anyone to visit our resource room, staffed by Lake Champlain Basin Program team members. So if you have a question, if you see something in the water, you'd like to know what it is, you can call to them, you can send a photo. They are super knowledgeable and experts in a lot of different things. And then if they don't know, they'll contact me or others on our team who might know more, and we work to get you answers.
They bring a water sample in and have somebody look at it under a microscope if it's something like.
I believe so. They have scopes there, and they, I think you can do that. I'll say yes. Colleen, you can tell me if I'm wrong.
I'll tell you what, Matt, we have scopes, whether we can identify it or not, maybe
Yes,
a different story.
Exactly. Well, you can just look at it.
Let's look at it. Free.
Yeah, just in a few words, could you say something about the proposed alum treatments on segments in the lake?
Yes.
The question is.
Yeah, the question is about alum treatments on Lake Champlain. So alum is kind of a shorthand term for aluminum sulfates, which is something that is used worldwide, type of salt, and it's used to lock up phosphorus and kind of precipitate it out of a solution. So it's used in wastewater treatment, for example, to remove phosphorus. It binds the phosphorus, and then you can kind of scoop it out of there or remove it from the system. So we understand really well how it works. It's used in drinking water reservoirs, smaller, highly managed water bodies throughout the country and throughout the world. But it's never been used on a lake the size of Lake Champlain. It has been applied to other natural lakes in Vermont with a lot of success over the history. Lake Maury is an example. Ticklenacre Pond is another one. Right now, there is work moving forward to look at an alum treatment for Lake Carmi to deal with the phosphorus and cyanobacteria blooms issue there. For Lake Champlain, we have funded studies on the appropriateness, potential use of alum in Missisquoi Bay, and there's also ongoing work for St. Albans Bay. At this point, it's at the feasibility level, high level, and nothing has moved forward that is resembling a plan of action there. So basically what we have is the study, the appropriateness of different alternatives, and essentially for Missisquoi Bay, all phosphorus removal alternatives have kind of been looked at and considered, but alum is really the only one that's appropriate to move forward with if you're going to do anything. But it would be a departure from our current approach because it's a much more hands-on engineering-based solution that would provide shorter-term relief while the longer-term actions are taking effect.
So we are past the time.
We are, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I appreciate everyone's interest and questions. No pressure to stay longer. If you need to get to some other things, for folks in the room, please help yourself to some more food in the back. Matt, if you don't mind, there are a couple more questions online. That would be great if you could answer. So South Lake B has high phosphorus in figure 7, but little cyanobacteria blooms in figure 5. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, it's so South Lake is a very different than the rest of the lake. So we call them physiographic differences. So depth, temperature, wind speed, things like that. South Lake resembles a river in some ways. And if you have it's less impacted by legacy phosphorus probably than areas like St. Albans Bay and Missisquoi Bay. The other thing is we have just less monitoring data in the South Lake, so that may be impacting our results. We have many more, volunteer monitors who are able to make it out to St. Albans Bay and Missisquoi Bay, so that may be a factor in the differences there too. But I think the main reason is, things like water clarity, temperature, and the amount of mixing going on. That's probably impacting.
Maybe it's on stagnant.
That's the way I think of it. Yeah.
And one more, figure 3 shows beach closures. Do you have trend data on that?
Do we have trend? It's really tough to do trend data or trends on beach closures because of the nature of the data. We have kind of different beaches reporting different years. We did not do that for this round. I think we did it in 2021, but it was too difficult, or not too difficult, but it wasn't appropriate to draw kind of trend conclusions from the data.
Thank you.
Yeah. That all of them?
Yeah, I'm sure
Okay.
people have more questions, but that's all that's in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
So, just thank you all for coming again. Thank you, everybody who participated online. We really appreciate it. Thank you to the Basin Program staff for that excellent report. And if anybody has any questions, follow up. If you have a legislator you want to share this with, we would love that. We will be meeting with them in the month of January. But if there's anybody that you know personally, that's the best way to get the message across about the importance of preserving and protecting Lake Champlain. I don't know if any of my other CAC members want to say anything before we adjourn.
Just a plug for constituents. I'm sorry, is somebody online?
Did someone say something online?
Yep, Carrie was going to say something.
Oh, Carrie. Sorry.
No word.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to just thank everyone on the CIC and participants today. As you know, I'm one of the 2 House members on the CAC, but my term ends in January. It's been a real honor for me to serve in this capacity. I plan on staying engaged. So this is important work, and it's certainly we need to be focused on over the long term to address all the opportunities that were presented today. I thank the staff at the Basin Program, fantastic presentations, terrific work that you all do. And again, I wish everyone the best of luck to continue to pursue these solutions in a collaborative, targeted way to address the suite of opportunities in front of us. So thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you for all your work and everything you've done so far. I feel like I've been involved with you since I started this work years ago, and everything you've done for Lake Champlain and all of Vermont's waters. So thank you. Lori?
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. We'll miss you, but we're so glad we have you as the ongoing public advocate. But I just wanted to reiterate what's been said here about the value of volunteerism. All of you have exercised that, whether you're online or coming out in this room, just to share your love, concern of Lake Champlain. We really need that, and a lot of this data is in part driven by volunteers. So to the extent that you have time to share, we can use that. And then coming up during the legislative session, we need your voices. Often we hear from legislators that they don't hear enough from their constituency. And, in Vermont in particular, we have one of the most representative democracies in the world. So your contact to your local representative or your state senator, this really does make a difference. So raise your voices. You all have shared, incredible experiences and love for this lake. And speak out for it because it needs your voice, and in particular, you can move forward on policy, regulatory reform, and continue to value protection and investment in this incredible water body. And thank you all for being here and for Basin Program and great CAC members who are volunteering their time as well.
Lori hands out a lot of thank yous in her day, but she deserves a big thank you from her and her organization and what they do.
When you speak to your legislators, remember to use the word must, because that's what we said. We wrote must. Vermont must. So thank you, everybody. Have a great holiday. Drive safely tonight if you're driving somewhere far with the snow on the roads, and dump your sudsy soap in the lawn and not down the storm drain.
Couple of quick things. Here, how will we turn over?
Turn over, some residential.
Thank you.